All right, what I decided to do was instead of actually making a quiz from scratch, I thought I'd first show you what all of the different types of quiz questions look like and how I built them from a pre-built one. And then I'll show you some tips for how like some of the question types are harder to write than others. So what I did was I created this thing called a sample quiz, and actually you'll be able to edit this once I publish it, and you'll be able to see everything about it. I'll put it as a sub module inside the online teaching resources. So let me just click that quiz. And so this is basically the screen that we would have gotten if we were creating the quiz from scratch. So like there was the ability to edit the quiz, and then we had these tabs up at the top, the details and the questions. So I've already filled out some details for this quiz. I think I have it set up for, yeah, actually maybe I haven't set it up yet, but it really doesn't matter. So what I'm really interested in right now are the questions. So this is a quiz for which I've actually put together a whole bunch of questions already. And what I'd like to do is actually show you two things. One is I'll show you the different types of questions that I've put together here. And I'll show you what the student sees when they take this quiz, and then I'll show you how each of these problems was created. Let me do that from the student point of view first. Let me just show you what these questions look like once they're assembled. So I tried to put one of each type of question in to show you what's possible here. So like the first question, okay, so when the student comes into the quiz, what they see is basically whatever instructions you've left them. So in this quiz, I haven't left any instructions. I figured that these questions are pretty self-explanatory, and the student will figure out how to answer them when they get them. There's a list of how many questions there are over on the right-hand side, and there's a time elapsed thing over here on the right that tells the student how long they've been in the quiz. Basically the student will just come down through these quiz questions as they see them. You'll see that the point values are written over here on the right-hand side. From the student's point of view, the questions always, no matter what you title them when you create the quiz, the student always sees them as question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4. So if you give it a clever title, they actually don't get to see what the title of your question is. So they'll just see essentially the question. So like here's an example of a question that is a multiple choice question where I have purposely tried to put in some equations here to show you that it is possible to do like LaTeX typesetting if you're into that sort of thing. So like here's a question where it asks them to take the Laplace transform. So you select one of the answers. The next question is also a multiple choice question. So it's actually a similar question type, but in this case I've embedded a photograph or a picture that I created by hand so that you can sort of mix and match different types of things. So like I actually don't remember what the answer to this one is, but basically you select an answer. So those are examples of multiple choice questions. You can also set up true and false questions. So Fourier's law can be derived from conservation of energy. That's false. But of course, a true and false question is really just a multiple choice question in disguise with few choices. Let's see. So question 4 here is an example of a like a checkbox question. So in the vocabulary of Canvas, this would be called a multiple answers. So this is a multiple answers question. So you just are supposed to select all that apply. Let's see, does this one apply? I don't know. I'm just going to select randomly so we can do this faster. So you'd have to actually read through all of the ones that apply and check the ones that do and don't. There's an interesting question about how Canvas grades a question like this, because in this question it is possible to get the question partially right and partially wrong. What Canvas does in questions like these is it takes your point value and basically if you didn't select something that's supposed to be selected, that's considered wrong. And if you select something that was not supposed to be selected, that's also considered wrong. And basically I think what it does is it's giving partial credit, but basically it just takes the number of correct answers as the total, And, if you didn't select that number of correct answers, basically you get that deducted. So it is possible, like if it's a 1-point question and there were 5 possible answers, but you only selected 2 of the correct answers, you'll only get a 2 out of 5. So less than 1. So question 5 here is what's called a fill in the blank question. So this is one where you're expected to type in a word. It says the quantity square root of K times rho times Cp is referred to as thermal blank. And you're supposed to type in the answer, which in this case is effusivity. I don't, in these questions, I don't think it accounts for capitalization. Actually, I'm going to purposely check that right now. But so I think that it doesn't care whether you capitalize or don't capitalize when you do this. I think it's pretty tolerant of that. Question 6 is actually the same thing, but this is what's called a multiple fill-in-the-blank question. So the quantity K that appears in Fourier's law is called thermal conductivity. Oops, gotta spell it right. The quantity K over rho Cp is the thermal diffusivity. And the quantity square root K rho Cp, whatever. So this is the question that students would normally get wrong. So I'm just going to type in diffusivity because this is what a student would probably do. Question 7. So question 7 is a similar format. It's actually the same question, but asked a different way. It says the quantity K that appears in Fourier's law is called thermal, and then instead of a blank where they have to type it in randomly, now they get a selection. So this is a multiple drop-down question. It's called a multiple drop-down question. So you would select the one that you think it is. So this is an easier version of the same question. I would recommend, if you're going to do these kind of questions, this is actually probably a better way to do it. Actually, it takes a little bit more work on the part of the professor to create a question like this, because you actually have to provide the 3 choices for each drop-down when you create it. But this question is a little bit better from the student point of view, because if a student is terrible at spelling or isn't really sure what you're trying to get at, this can actually help prod them in the correct direction. It really depends on what you're trying to do. So question 8 in this case is a numerical answer question. So it says, consider the fin below. If the length of the fin was doubled from 280 millimeters to 560, by what percentage would the total heat transfer increase? And then I give them some hint as to how to calculate it. So in this case, you would actually have to go do some work on paper that wouldn't show up in the Canvas quiz, and you would have to calculate the answer. I actually cannot remember exactly what the answer is, but I know it's something like 3-point-something%. So I will try and type in an answer. And one thing I'll point out about Canvas quizzes that have numerical answers, so I know these are popular things to want to do, but Canvas is actually pretty bad at numerical answer type questions. Now, it's good from the point of view of Canvas will allow you to allow an error bar. So students are generally not going to calculate the answer to the same number, to the same precision that you will. And in fact, there's often some leeway in how you approximate things. So Canvas will allow you to specify a range for these answers. So that's good. One thing that Canvas really stinks at is scientific notation. Canvas does not do scientific notation. So for example, if I were to type in 0.0003 and then I try and enter that, it's just going to round that to 0. If I type in 3 to the minus 6, so that's a number that might come up if you were trying to do microns, guess what? Rounds it to 0. I have no idea how it decides to do that, but it does not allow a lot of, I want to say it only allows maybe 3 or 4 decimals of accuracy in the one direction. So, you can type in millimeters, but it'll accept down to 3 digits. But if you try going to a lot of digits downward, it's just a total cluster. So you have to almost construct these questions by telling the students what the order of magnitude of the response is. So like if I wanted to provide a question that had microns, like where the answer was in microns, I would have to tell, like if the answer was 3 microns, I would have to specifically tell them in the question to type it in as 3 and then assume that the units are microns. So like ask for the units as microns. So that is a problem with Canvas that they really need to fix, but they haven't. Okay, so that's numerical. Those are numerical answer types. I'll get to what happens. So there is a separate type of numerical answer problem where the parameters that are in the question actually get randomly seeded. So I know some people have asked about that. There is a different way to do that, but this particular question, you'll notice the questions appear as if they're hard. Well, actually, you can't really see how I created this question yet. But in this question, I've hard-coded the numbers that appear here. There's a different way to do that that I'll show you coming up. All right, so question 9 says match the quantity with its corresponding SI unit. So this is one. This is called a matching question. This is the matching type question. So like basically there's a bank of possible answers that you have to match. So and each one of these has the same bank that you have to match up with whatever's on the left-hand side. I'm just going to randomly generate these quickly so that most of these are probably going to be wrong. And then there are essay questions. So now one word of caution about these is that obviously an essay question requires manual grading. And in fact, for an essay question, you can't even assign a default grade in Canvas for a graded Canvas quiz. And so if you have an essay quiz, just be aware that Canvas is going to ask you or your TA to go and actually look at the responses. I actually like this style of question for a small graduate course because it actually forces you to look at the things that the students are saying. And you can go in and comment on what they said. Like you can make like little comments and really get a sense for where your students are at. Just keep in mind that you have to manually grade this thing. So like how are energy and temperature the same and how are they different? You type your answer here and it gets entered. Okay, here's a different way of using that same kind of question that's actually a lot easier to use. I sometimes do these. I call these fetch quests. So I'll type in something up here and then I'll ask the student to go find a URL and then just type it in as the answer. And then basically this is just a way of checking to make sure that the student is actually looking for the kind of resources that you're asking for. So like in this question, I ask them to figure out where the digital library of mathematical functions is located on the internet. And so it basically forces a student to do a Google search at least once in their life and try and find something. I do that with other kinds of stuff too. Like so like here's the same, actually a very similar question, but in this case, instead of like providing a URL, I'm asking them to actually download some sort of file. So often what I'll do is I'll ask students to go find the PDF of a research article and upload it to the Canvas site just to show me that you found it. So it's a good way to help, essentially make students go find things on the internet. So I call that a fetch quest. And it's actually quite useful for teaching soft skills. So this is one where I ask students to go find a graph of heat capacity versus temperature for copper. Basically, in this kind of question, I'm just looking to expose students to what a typical temperature dependence looks like for certain types of materials. So when the student would find some kind of file and upload it, you can restrict what type of files. Actually, I think in a Canvas quiz you can't restrict the type of thing they can upload. But I'll take a look at that when we go back to the questions. Here's another question. Now this actually looks very much like the question I asked earlier. So remember, I had this question earlier that had a bunch of preceded numbers, and I asked students to give a numerical answer. This is the same question, or at least it looks the same to the user, But this question is actually randomly seeded. So I've got a question up here that says calculate the heat dissipation of this fin per unit depth, so in units of watts per meter, if the difference between the temperature at the base and the ambient air is 36, it should say 36 Kelvin. And so the student has to do a bunch of work here in the background on paper, and then they provide a numerical answer. I gotta be honest, I have no idea. I haven't pre-calculated the answer, so I have no idea what the answer is. Let's just say it's 8 watts per meter, 8 watts per meter, and you would type that in. So like in this question, the key number here is the 36 that appears here. That's a number that's basically like, it's a blank that I type into Canvas. I provide Canvas with a formula, and Canvas uses that formula plus whatever it randomly seeded as the number that's up there to calculate what the answer is supposed to be, and then that number appears down here. There's all sorts of options about like how you randomly seed this number, like what range of numbers can I give here, and how many possibilities can the student have. So it's not totally random. In this case, I actually have, I think, 4 sets of quizzes that are out there with different numbers that are placed there. And it can be more than one number too. Like you can change like 4 different numbers in the question at the same time. And, as long as you're using a formula, you can put it in there and it'll, do things. It'll provide numerical results. The key thing here is that these questions take a little longer to create because you have to think about what the blanks are going to be, what the formula is supposed to be. And there are some limitations about like what kind of formulas can be used. Obviously, like you're not going to be putting in things that involve like iterative solutions here. Like these have to be very simple formulas. But basically, like you can do maybe square roots and multiplication and addition and absolute values and a couple. Like you can do some trigonometric functions, but if you're looking to like involve error functions or anything super complicated, those are not going to be good. Those are probably not going to be good solutions here. Hopefully in the future they allow sort of Python-based grading, but they don't currently do that in Canvas. And that's it. That's the quiz. So those are all the different types of possible questions you can have. When a student's done, they'll submit the quiz. In this question, apparently I left 2 of them blank. But if I hit OK, depending on how you have the quiz set up, the student might see different things. So if you have this set up, so I guess the way that this is currently set up is so that the student can see their responses and can see whether they were correct. So if you have that set up, so that is actually the default. The default is that the student gets to see the correct answers right away. So if you don't want that, you need to be careful about that. And the student gets some feedback about like what they did correct. In some of the cases here, you'll see that I've actually typed in some feedback to the student. So in the case of one of these questions, I don't know if you know anything about heat transfer, but calculating the value of M for a fin type problem basically involves needing to know the correct value of the cross-sectional area and the perimeter. And in this case, I give the students a hint regardless of what they actually type in. I have it set up to give them hints in case they get it wrong. And this was the multiple answer question. So this is an interesting one. So in this one, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible correct answers, but I did not check off one of the ones that was supposed to be checked off. And in fact, I incorrectly checked off a different one. And so the way that Canvas handled that was that it deducted for both the one that I didn't select and the one that I selected incorrectly and sort of prorated the answer. So there were basically 5 checkboxes I was supposed to do, and I incorrectly identified 2 of them. And so it took 2/5 of the answer away, so I got a 60%. So that stinks for me. So I did, okay, so this was one of the things I wanted to check was whether Canvas quiz, so for a fill-in-the-blank type question, it does not care about the, what do you call it, the case of how somebody types it in. I got that one correct, so yay me. In this case, so this was a question that involved typing in 3 things. I apparently typed in one of them incorrectly, and so it tells me what that is. And then in this case, I have the quiz set up to tell me not only that I answered it incorrectly, but it tells me the correct answer, which is a feature that you can turn off. So here's one where, what was this question? Oh yeah, this one involved multiple drop downs. So in this case, I incorrectly selected a drop down, and so it deducted points for one of the drop downs. Oh, look at this. I remembered the answer correctly. So this is one where I had to type in the correct answer numerically, and I typed it in, and you can see that it actually also gives what the correct answer is. Apparently the correct answer was 3.8% with a margin of 1%. And interestingly, there's actually a bug I'll show you about this when we created the quiz, but there's actually a bug in Canvas that you have to watch out for when you create numerical answer quizzes. By default, it actually allows, it sort of pre-populates the answers, and one of the answers is always 0. So you have to remember to delete the 0, or else students can just guess the answer 0 and they'll always be right. And in this case, it turns out I forgot to do that. So word to the wise. I'll go back and talk about that in a second. Okay, so this was one where I had to actually match. This was the matching game. Apparently I did extremely poorly on the matching game. So I did very, very poorly on choosing the correct units. Yeah, so in this case it gives both what I answered and the correct answer next to each one. So if you have an essay question, it'll just tell the student that it's not yet graded. Students actually kind of hate these essay questions because, in my experience, because when, for example, if this was a quiz that only had one question, they would basically currently have a 0 on the quiz for the essay portion because it hasn't been graded yet, and they have no idea what the grade's going to be. So somebody has to go in and grade it. So I guess I didn't answer the URL question, and then I never uploaded my answer to the fetch quest for the heat capacity. On question 13 was the one that was a randomly populated question. So in the parlance of Canvas, this is called a formula quiz, and apparently I didn't get it right. So I guess the correct answer was 50.9, and I answered 6, so I got it wrong. So boo. But I still got a 17 out of 24 for the quiz, and that's actually not too shabby considering how quickly I guessed the answers. Okay, so now I'm going to stop this video, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the edit button, and I'll show you actually how I created all of these different types of questions.